Welcome to Product Momentum, a community of thought leaders and learners coming together to celebrate the product people who are shaping our way ahead. Inspired by our most pressing questions and insightful guests, we'll explore the challenges you face and offer practical, hands-on guidance your team can implement today. This is Product Momentum. Here are your hosts, Sean Flaherty and Paul Gable.
Sean, how you doing this morning?
I'm awesome today.
What a great episode. What a great episode. James Whitman, author of Launch Code, really impressed with his thinking. A lot of stuff we know, but really he drives home some pretty key tactics in terms of how to make sure that everybody understands how we're getting in front of customers.
Yeah. And I do think that it is somewhat of a lost art. I think we get very into how are we building, why are we building, but once we actually achieve what we needed to build, launching it to market is something that we rely on another group to do.
Yeah.
And this, James's perspective really helps bring it home that we need to be a part of that process. It needs to be a part of your regular product process. And he gives us some great insight on how to make that happen.
Yeah. Of course, the advice that you really like, making sure that you get out and have beer with the sales team every now and then.
Yeah. Title of the podcast, Beers with Sales.
There you go. All right, let's get after it.
Okay. Hey, everybody. We are here today with James Whitman. James Whitman is the author of Launch Code, the playbook for continuous growth, and the founder of Growth Guidepost. He works with mission-driven leaders to help them make their most important decisions and achieve critical growth objectives. Throughout his career, he has held senior positions in both public and private organizations, where he has successfully established repeatable commercial practices. James has a proven track record of introducing dozens of products and services to the market, scaling organizations, and building high-performing teams. James, thank you for being with us today. We're really excited about this topic. It builds off of our last podcast, so we're excited to kind of continue that conversation. I am also really interested in learning more about your system for launch. I want to start with kind of launch is really seen as kind of like an afterthought, right? We're so focused in the process of building requirements and working with teams to get products out, but that the actual act of putting something in front of customers for the first time is really kind of like a lost art. So how do you think that we got there? And just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, thanks for having me in this discussion. I spent most of my career not on the product side of the organization, but in sales and sales management. And we did a lot of launches and we brought a ton of products to market successfully. And it was closely in hand with our product colleagues. But I definitely saw this dynamic across a lot of the writing in the space and a lot of the discussion that takes place in product management. It's just, and then we hand it off to sales. And it kind of shortchanged all of that into yada, yada, yada. And I had lived in that yada, yada, yada for so long that I wanted to spend time to really to think about really a holistic process, because it does start up in innovation and product design and a lot of activities that happen in a product function. And then there's a separate activity that happens over here in sales. And in the best organizations we've found is like they're very harmonized and integrated across. So that was really the kind of the core that started me on this path and the research that became Launch Code. And I'll unpack that a little bit for you, but it's this, let's really look at what a good sales operation looks like that is a different motion than the discovery that's happening up in product design, but is also very dynamic. We've brought clients into the process in really the most direct way. Every sales interaction is a piece of market research, is a really powerful opportunity to be testing out product ideas and seeing how they match with actual budgets and actual buying behavior and attitudes and competitors and all of that dynamicness that happens in the real world. And we've seen that really great organizations make that client listening that happens both before you go to market and after you go to market, a continuous lean exercise. And that's when the magic happens.
That's awesome. I really like that where you said that every sales interaction is client research. I think that's awesome. That's a great way to think about it. What are some things that you have a unique perspective coming from the sales side of the house? What are some things that you think right away that maybe product people who don't have have much interactions with salespeople, what is something that they could learn right away by interacting with that side of the business more?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. We spent a lot of time as we were working on Launch Code to understand why these ideas of collaboration and trust and, clear handoffs sometimes didn't work well. I think there's a pretty solid collective understanding that we should listen to our clients, that we should work well with our colleagues. There were kind of non-controversial ideas. But why doesn't it happen in the real world? Like, what are the barriers? And there are, they show up in popular culture in a bunch of funny places in Silicon Valley and other shows like that, of this product sales or product engineering tension in the organization. And sometimes, maybe even often, it's bad behavior on the sales side. And I think we all have examples. I've been part of sales organizations. I've seen it. Everyone has a lot of horror stories. And as we started doing interviews, there was a lot of like, oh, I can't trust sales. Those guys will say anything, or there was a bad actor there. And that's a real thing. And it ends up kind of eroding a lot of the relationship. And, in my experience, I've worked with some super professional salespeople who were, well educated and articulate and highly principled in their work. And that's really the majority of the folks in sales. And when organizations listen well to that, they get better outcomes. So kind of a very tactical idea is one that we call a sales cabinet. You're a senior product leader. Who are the 2 or 3 senior sales reps who you rely on to do an early test of an idea, or to get access to the best clients, or to start profiling a new offering to the most strategic clients early on in a trusted way that isn't overcommitting your roadmap, but is giving you really crucial inputs about, that's not going to fly, or here's what I would have to do, or wait a second, the competitor just brought something to market. So that cabinet can be a formal approach. In some organizations, chief product officer is engaging chief revenue officer and say, nominate these people. It's a great kind of career enhancing engagement opportunity for some staff, or it can be a lot more informal. As product manager, go get beers with some sales reps. I mean, it doesn't have to be this big complex governance structure. But when that happens, you start breaking down the barriers in very practical ways.
I think that's a tremendous idea to break down the barriers. However, one concern, playing devil's advocate here, is that salespeople tend to be in sales because they're highly influential. Mm-hmm. They talk you into things, right? So, and they're also generally, in my experience, often very opinionated. So they have ideas. They talk to a handful of customers, and they get in there that this feature needs to get built, or this feature should be tweaked, or this is the biggest problem. Yep. So, I would be concerned that you don't want to give them too much power. You want to be able to take that feedback from those salespeople, engage with them, integrate it, but really take it with a grain of salt, because they're, like I said, they have different incentives.
Absolutely. I started my career in national security work, and when you're gathering intelligence, it's evaluate the information, evaluate the source. Yeah. Absolutely. I think the cabinet should be advisory. You've kind of called out one of the challenges that I've seen in big tech environments, where the senior account manager pounds their shoe on the table and says, this feature must be built because one client needs it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes given sort of undue sort of power in that transaction, and can steer roadmaps in kind of unconstructed ways. When we cataloged failure paths, that is one of them that often takes place. So you have to think about what are the controls around that it's advisory. What I've seen personally in a lot of different contexts is the selection of the right type of rep for that discussion is often the right kind of rep to be on a launch team. The dynamic of the new product versus an in-market product is very different. And the disposition of some reps of, I don't want to touch this risky new thing. Where are the reference clients? how many years of data do we have built up on usage patterns? What's the renewal cycle like? When those questions aren't answered, a lot of reps don't want to go near it, kind of reducing risks. But there are lots of reps, or there's a percentage of reps who like the new, or are very curious about how the product is evolving and want to be in on something that is new to market. When I was a rep, that was what I gravitated towards. Was what's the new thing? And, it was both, I had an interest in doing it. It was, I always saw I trusted my product people. So this is good stuff. I'm going to be the first person to grab the best opportunities. But also it was more fun. It was more interesting, more creative to figure out the scripting, to rearrange the collateral, to figure out, wait a second, it's not the procurement team we're trying to speak with. We need to be talking to this benefits team. And what that sequencing is. Talk about sort of climbing through the lock and figuring out what are the set of things that have to happen. What's the formula for that product in that environment? That's the kind of rep you're looking for the cabinet who's going to engage in that creative process. And you're right, you have to be governance around it. You have to create the right sort of expectations for the rep if you're part of that conversation. For me, it was always a privileged to kind of be invited into that room and be in a different discussion than a lot of my other sales peers, and sitting at the table, kind of like the big brains in the company who are coming up with these great ideas. And, initially, sort of trepidation, offering feedback, and then over time being able to say, okay, here's where it's right. But here's where it's wrong. And here's how I'd position it quite differently. And if we oriented it this way, we would be able to unlock this part of the market. That's the kind of conversation that becomes really powerful. A lot of the magic
helps you form much better experiments. You have
totally
objective people helping you think through the problems. Something you said at the beginning of after you asked the first question there, lit me up a little bit. It was about, hey, why don't we put the product people and the engineers in front of the customers more? Like there's always there's this, we all talk about it. We all know it's important. We all know we should be doing it, but we don't do it. And I think there's something else there. Like, I think the incentives on the design and development side are wrong too, right? Like product people, engineers are often highly metriced on how much they're able to get out the door. I had a conversation. This is top of mind for me because I had a conversation with one of my leaders here with one of our bigger clients this morning. And they're so focused on output and the things that are coming up that you don't have the time, and there's no incentive for you to actually take a break and go listen to what the customers are actually saying and what they're doing, because the incentives are a little messed up. What do you think of that?
What we've seen as the key to this is that as a product leader, the client needs to be a direct part of that operation. We talk about the client deeply involved in the product. And an example of that is what Bloomberg does. The senior product leader for, the new software offering or the platform that is being consumed by some part of the financial services industry is part of the sales cycle in different ways, is part of the value proposition that the sales rep presents. And I think that's really the starting point. So when sales rep is offering this solution, they say, well, in addition to access and this many licenses, you'll have an opportunity to have an annual briefing with our senior expert in this area, who's also talking to hundreds of other similar clients on a daily and weekly basis. And it's part of the promise of the offering. It's not just the software, it's got some solutions around it as well. So what that sets up is a couple of different things. It's great, it's more value for the offering, and allows it to sell more readily. And perhaps most importantly, it gives that product owner a direct connection with the customers. They have an annual conversation. Probably not going to talk to every customer every year, but if they've got, it's a small platform sort of with 500, 1,000, couple thousand clients, they're talking to a couple hundred clients over the course of the year. They've established a relationship. They're able to test out some ideas on that conversation, considering doing this and this, and get direct feedback. And then if they're in a direct mode and they really need to sample a big part of their base, they can do that directly. They don't really have to mediate through the sales team. They've got a direct relationship, but keep the sales team informed, but it's a natural part of the value proposition of the offering. That's the kind of, now the client is in the design part of the process on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah, I always like to preach that, you can't really build a great software product without having a group of what I call advocates, like customers who actually care, users who care about the product and the problems that it solves. And unless you, like, that's how great products get built, to involve those folks, not all your customers. You're never going to serve and solve problems for everybody. But if you can figure out and hone in on who is it that we can turn into advocates, how do we go find more of those and turn them into beta testers for you? That's how you build great products. I'm totally aligned with it.
Yeah. And it's a continuous activity. It's not like you do it once. And, a company like Bloomberg is great because they're always adding new products. And that product leader is always looking at extensions and sort of adjacencies. And those conversations start feeding on themselves, and they really build a practice area around a domain because they've built people who trust them. They're in a dialogue with in a very regular way. And they're getting that really direct feedback. So they're not just guessing at what clients want. The clients have designed it, co-developed it with them.
They're part of the process.
You mentioned something earlier that because I recently read your book, that has stuck with me, and I want to make sure that I get an opportunity to ask this question. In each chapter within Launch Code, right? You start with failure paths. Why did you take that route? I thought it was really unique. It's a unique way to approach the subject, is to start each section of the book with failure paths.
Yeah. And it's interesting. With my editor, we've had a bunch of discussions, and the book is ultimately tries to be very uplifting, and is about finding meaning in work and the excitement and the freshness of being involved in new pursuits. So the question was, why are we bringing everybody down with these failure paths? The kind of the framework is built that way because there are rakes to step on. There are things that will trip us up if we overlook them. And they're shocking in terms of they're right in front of us. So the first chapter of Launch is listen to your clients. Basic core activity, good client discovery. A couple of your other podcasts, many of your episodes talk about the importance of this. So we know, and we have a lot of really powerful tools and frameworks for doing that client listening, but we make mistakes. And the mistakes, when we started to take a look at the research process around the book, really are very specific, about half a dozen ones around client listening. And they're in areas like too few examples. We sample only our most favored clients, or we slice a very particular part of the market and we don't see the whole picture. One of the things I've seen a lot of is sort of speaking on behalf of the client. So, if you've come from the domain where you're now selling an offering, it's really easy to say, no, I don't need to talk to systems engineers. I was a systems engineer for 20 years. And the second you switch roles and are now developing or selling an offering, you've lost that connection. And with technology, we go out of date really, really fast if we've switched roles. There's all kinds of problems around leading the witness. Isn't this an amazing feature? What do you think, Sean? I mean, people are polite and they say nice things. So there's a lot of errors we make. So we call them out. We've pseudonymed all of the failure paths. So kind of protecting the innocent or the guilty in that process. But I found it really useful to at least to take a look at why do we make these mistakes and have those as a kind of point of reference, and then talk about what can we do to avoid these. And there are some real clear approaches and steps that we can do to do that.
Another big one for product managers is the survivorship bias, right? So we don't typically go out and interview the people that left. And I think there's a lot of juice to be had in that population.
To follow your chart and understand what's going on. Yeah,
exactly.
So you got into some of the common challenges you've seen in product launches.
Mm-hmm.
Who right now in product is it? If our listeners want to go out and say, okay, we've got the direction from the book, we've talked about in this podcast. Who are some companies out there that are really nailing launches that we could try to we could really learn from?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we have built the book around a series of profiles of organizations, and I'll kind of rewind a little bit and give you the quick sense of the research that we conducted to build this. It was really a look at organizations that had grown successfully over an extended period of time. It had delivered strong financial results and had done that through new product introductions. We identified about 65 companies public companies that fit that profile. And we then spent a lot of time and energy to understand what they were doing differently and how they operated. We had a lot of great conversations with many of these companies. We got some interviews. We were able to conduct secondary research, really understand. And there are companies, I mentioned Bloomberg. There's a couple others in financial services. S&P is really strong. The Moody's also has a great sort of platform for growth. Companies in the pharmaceutical industry has a very disciplined, very unique launch approach. A lot of constituencies, doctors and payers and providers and regulators. They have an extremely disciplined approach because the stakes are so high. There's companies like Thermo Fisher, an industrial company, Waters. They're not companies that are the kind of the big headline grabbers. Typically, they're working in a very disciplined way and growing in a very consistent way. The tech space, I think Atlassian has been so deeply effective at building a internal culture that deals with the different cadences, different functions they're going to be facing, and brings together the organization in really smart ways. And then I love, are you familiar with LK? They make those water fountains at airports and in schools, big water fillers.
Yeah.
They have a really great product discipline exercise and are really great at understanding the complexity of placing one of those machines inside a piece of infrastructure. Think about all of the different people who have to say yes to put one of those on a campus or an airport location and maintain it and put the filters in and do all those componentry. They've been really smart at figuring that out and thinking about their product, not just as that machine stuck in the wall, but the system around it and the selling motion.
More evidence that every company is becoming a product company. Like there's product everywhere you look, for sure.
Exactly right.
I've been capturing some notes here on the side. I've got, I think, 5 pretty profound takeaways that I think all product leaders should think about. Now, I don't want to discourage people from buying the book. I think if you're listening to this podcast, you're interested in the product space, you should buy the book. But here's my key takeaways, and then I'm going to ask you to kind of explain why'd you write the book at the end. But here's my takeaways, and I'll let you reflect on them after I throw them out there. 1, I think client listening, one of the themes of your book and of this entire podcast is that client listening should be a core value embedded in the fabric of everything you do. Number 2, information for product leaders comes from a lot of different sources. I loved your quote that you probably stole from whatever covert government work you did. Evaluate the information, but also always evaluate the source. Understand the incentives of the people that are giving you the information. Number 3, evaluate why engineers and product people don't get access to customers as much as we all say they should. There's a lot of other things going on, and if we don't purposely make time for that customer interaction and that customer interfacing, we're losing something big, and that's important. Number 4, find the right team members. Make sure you're choosing the right people to include on your what you call like a cabinet, right? Your sales cabinet or your customer cabinet, because everybody tells themselves stories, and you want to look for people that can be as objective as possible and really read the room and try to understand, what's really going on with the customers. And it's not everybody. And then lastly, this concept of finding your advocates. Like, go get some customers to be a part of the build process. Get customers, get them involved. Like, you can't build great products without great customers who literally care about the future of the product, and even get them to care about your team. Like, I think that's important. Some important lessons. What do you think about my captures?
I love it. I love it. I love your first one. Make sure to buy the book. That's top priority. No, I think that the book is a very practical, it's a useful book. It's designed to help leaders, both on the product side and the commercial side, lean into this process more. It's a guide for senior leadership to think about how our incentives are different in different functions. Our ways of work are different. Our calendars, technologies we use. Think about the systems of record that each one of those functions use, and how many times leaders from one function log into the system of record of the other, and how many times, dashboards go back and forth. Not that much. Done some research on the topic, and not surprisingly, product people aren't logging into Salesforce, and salespeople aren't logging into Jira. So the conversations, and there's a lot of forces, and they're positive forces in many ways. We should continue to run agile teams with sprints, and we should continue to run sales teams with quarterly goals. Those things still make sense, but we need to find bridges across that and think about sort of the governance and creating opportunities to stumble over each other in positive ways and get into discussions. So that, as you're kind of drawing out, is a little bit of the kind of the, I don't know, the big idea in this, that we're in a workplace that we're hopefully working with people that we like. We're spending a lot of time with them, and we're working with clients that we hopefully like and want to spend time with. And we're hopefully representing, developing products that we believe have an impact and are going to drive some real change. So we need to be very practical. We need frameworks, we need processes, we need governance, but we need to do it in a very human-centered way. And that's the balance that I tried to strike with Launch Code, is to bring those two things and think about, what was it within our power in a really practical way to implement or change our thinking or change an approach to build kind of better impact for our clients and quite frankly for ourselves.
Awesome. Two quick questions for you. One, what are you reading? Like what's got your attention these days? What do you recommend to our audience?
So I just saw, I'm going to check out Itmar Gilead's book. That's
Great.
top of my list. There's another book called Founders Code that looks at high level pieces. Those are both on my reading list. A little bit of fiction that just hit. There's a group of books that have been very impactful. Dan Olson's work, Rita McGrath, Clinton Christensen, have been really impactful on my writing. Was a close colleague of Matt Dixon for many years.
Oh, I'm a big fan of his work.
He's fantastic.
Effortless Experience, one of my favorite books.
Excellent. Yeah, that came out of our old company, Corporate Executive Board.
Didn't realize that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, great writers who bring a lot of rigor to their writing and try to create useful books that have an impact, that are based in fact, and talk about real problems that we have and how do we address them in meaningful ways.
Cool. And one last question: how do you define innovation, James?
Defining innovation. Let's see. So for me, innovation is indeed an upstream activity. It's the creative exercise that helps us create something incremental or truly step function that sometimes has to be disconnected from the rigor that happens in things like market research and validation and these exercises. It's a little more of a creative process, but in an enterprise, we can't just exist in that creative space. So it's when we connect that creativity with the real practical. So will it fly? Is basically the question. So innovation for its own sake has to be connected with the organization and what we do. So I would argue that the huge part of what we do as organizations is innovation, that we're coming up with ideas, we're running it through this design and test and validate exercise, we're bringing it to market, and then we're repeating that. And if we're refreshing our portfolios, maybe a quarter, a third of our profit and our revenue is now flowing from these newer areas. And, product maturity models are going to say everything is going to mature and slow down. So what is new today, what is an innovation today, goes through its cycle, and there needs to be more to replace it. So if we're living in this mode where there's new and there's sort of decay over time, then innovation becomes our way of working.
That was great. James, we really want to thank you for hanging out with us today. My big takeaway, and I think maybe the title of this title of the podcast should be "Get Beers with Sales." That was that sums it up, right?
You buy in, Sean?
Yeah, that's my next book is "Get Beers with Sales."
Okay, I like it.
It's going to be a 1-page book. That's it.
Yeah.
But,
yep.
Find a way to get them to pay. So, thanks again for being with us today. This was awesome. Yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, James.
Well, that's it for today. In line with our goals of transparency and listening, we really want to hear from you. Sean and I are committed to reading every piece of feedback that we get, so please leave a comment or a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. Not only does it help us continue to improve, but it also helps the show climb up the rankings so that we can help other listeners move, touch, and inspire the world just like you're doing. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next episode.